Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Roadshow. We are broadcasting worldwide with participants from Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. This platform for students and anyone interested in cybersecurity bridges universities, international organizations, experts, think tanks, state institutions, and business. With us today are some of the world's foremost authorities on cybersecurity. Let me introduce our guests. Ambassador Jörg Lauber, General Keith Alexander, Mr. Bruce Schneier, and Colonel Jeffrey Erickson. Gentlemen, a warm thank you for joining us. We are grateful for your engagement in this project. Now let me present our guest speakers in more detail. Their profile covers different aspects of the cybersecurity ecosystem, including global governance, cyber diplomacy, technology, national security, defense, and of course, education. Ambassador Jörg Lauber, many of you already met the ambassador in November last year through our Facebook and the picture taken in front of the United Nations in Geneva, when we were handing over the new roadmap for cybersecurity education report. During the last 2 years, Ambassador chaired the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Cybersecurity. He has been serving as permanent representative of Switzerland to the UN, firstly in New York and now in Geneva. He has a rich experience in the world of diplomacy that span over 3 decades. He was involved in different areas, including the UN Conference on Disarmament, the International Court in The Hague, and as a diplomat posted in Thailand and China. Before joining the Swiss Department of Foreign Affairs, he worked on peacekeeping missions in Namibia and Korea. Ambassador holds a law degree from the University of Zurich. General Keith Alexander is one of the world's leading authorities on cybersecurity. He launched IronNet to fill the gap between cyber threats and available security technology with best-in-class cyber defense. A 4-star Army general, he was the highest-ranked military official leading the Department of Defense agencies, including US Cyber Command, the National Security Agency, during the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. President Obama appointed him as the first commander of US Cyber Command when it was created as a military institution to defend the nation's security in cyberspace. He has a rich and multidisciplinary educational background with advanced degrees that cover military studies, security, business, IT, and physics. Mr. Bruce Schneier is an acclaimed security technologist and best-selling author. He has worked in internet security since the mid-90s. He teaches at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, gives talks all over the world, and advises international tech companies. Mr. Schneier is a board member of the Tor project. The Economist describes him as a security guru. He promotes better regulation and serves on several national and international committees. Bruce Schneier is the founder and chief technology officer of Counterpane Internet Security, the world's leading protector of network information. His influential newsletter, Cryptogram, and his blog, Schneier on Security, counts over 250,000 readers. Click Here to Kill Everybody is one of his bestsellers and the name of the talk he will give today. Colonel Jeffrey Erickson is a highly decorated Army officer who served in different roles and international locations, including Iraq, the Republic of Korea, and Germany. He is the Chief of Staff for the Army Cyber Institute at West Point. the Army's think tank on cyber challenges. The Institute works with government, allies, industry, and academia to better understand the changing cyber landscape, how it impacts conflict and warfare, and to bridge the security gaps. The Institute priorities include critical infrastructure resilience, simulation using augmented and virtual reality, and various multidisciplinary partnerships to better protect the nation. In short, the Army Cyber Institute is preparing the future of education today. We promote a multidisciplinary approach to cybersecurity education. Better communication and cooperation across sectors is key to improve the cybersecurity ecosystem. We need better trust and security in cyberspace. Today's discussion fits perfectly with this approach. Let's take a look at the video presenting the students' perspective.
In our hyper-connected world, it's clear that cybercrime is on the rise. To maximize the potential of the digital era, we must ensure trust and security in cyberspace.
That's why we care about cybersecurity. No longer a niche subject, but a vital part of our daily lives. To be secure, we must be cybersecure.
Our online privacy, global finance, economy, good governance and the future of democracy, they all rely on well-functioning cybersecurity landscape.
We need good regulations and international cooperation to create a cybersecure ecosystem for all, from junior to senior.
Inclusivity is vital. We need a world of opportunity for everyone, leaving no one behind. The fruits of digital transformation must be shared by all.
That's why we can't take safety for granted. Our well-being and security is in our hands.
This message highlights opportunities and challenges for today and tomorrow.
Ambassador Lauber, greetings and welcome.
Very good to see you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very impressed. His introduction was super sophisticated. I'm really happy to be with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us for this discussion on cybersecurity that could not be more timely in the context of what's happening these days, especially with the preparations and how International Geneva is getting ready to host the Geneva Summit 2021 with Presidents Biden and President Putin to discuss nothing else but cybersecurity, which will be top of the agenda. Of course, not only the only topic, but this puts the Geneva platform and the work that you have been doing on cyber diplomacy really on top of the international agenda. Can you tell us a little bit about what is cyber diplomacy and its importance in today's context?
Thank you much, Adam. I don't think there is an agreed definition of what cyber diplomacy is, but it seems, or it feels to me more and more that it's actually everywhere. Every part, every issue that we've been dealt with in the traditional way in diplomacy has in one way or another become cyber diplomacy, because everything now has a cyber element. Think of the impact of cyber technology on trade or on human rights, or as we see on health now. And then, of course, on peace and security. everything somehow is cyber related and it's become cyber technology. I think a new element that we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months due to the COVID pandemic is that whatever issue we deal with in diplomacy now, diplomacy itself is much more reliant on cyber technology. We had to find new ways of keeping progresses going, keeping discussions going, without being able in traditional ways to come, sit together in meeting rooms, walking through the corridors, having coffee. And we're using all these platforms. And you yourself with the presentation today, the way you manage this are proof how much progress we made over the last year. So everything really has become cyber and cyber diplomacy in a way.
Well, you have really put the topic of cyber diplomacy on the global agenda with the work that you've been doing for the last over 2 years, which was exceptional in many ways. So you've been chairing the open-ended working group on cybersecurity, which is named this way. It's a short, but you have also been mandated by the United Nations General Assembly to do this work. Can you tell us about this process? Can you tell us about your experience and how you have seen also this landscape evolve during that period?
Yeah, with pleasure. Although I have to say, I always already, it's been recent. We completed our work, as you know, in March, a little more than 2 months ago. And to be honest, I already feel like old news because so much has happened since then. Just last week, another important parallel process concluded its work, the latest group of governmental experts on the same issue. And this week, actually, you will see a meeting in New York deciding on the parameters of the next phases of our work. But yes, I'll happily give you a bit of an overview of what the group did that I had the privilege and also the pleasure of chairing over the last 2 years. And I have to warn you already, I'm still very enthusiastic about our common work with it there. And so if I'm getting too long, please interrupt me, because I very much hope also to have an opportunity to interact with your students. Maybe just a few words on the history of the group, on the mandate, and then on the way to the result, and 1 or 2 words on the result. The mandate that you mentioned, the issue we discussed was the impact of cyber technology on peace and security. What's the relation between the two? Your students are not new to this. The issues are obvious. And it's also not, the issue is also not new to the United Nations. The United Nations looked at this issue, dealt with it for more than 20 years. So far, before our group, they've done this in the form of so-called groups of governmental experts. These were relatively limited groups. I think they started with 15. The last one had 25. We saw up until 2018, we saw 5 of these groups. And the last one that succeeded to agree in a consensus report was 2015. And over the years, they came up with a normative framework for sustainable behavior of states in cyberspace in relation to peace and security. A very smart, a very sophisticated framework that had basically 4 elements. One was a common understanding of the applicability of existing international law, UN Charter-based law in cyber. The second pillar was a set of norms, non-legally binding norms, for responsible behavior of states in the cyberspace. The third one was a set of confidence-building measures. And the fourth one, the element of technical cooperation, capacity building, the recognition that member states need to help each other out in addressing the issue. So that's the framework that has existed since 2015. In 2018, the General Assembly of the UN took up the issue again. There were 2 proposals to build a new process around these issues and to see how the framework can be developed. One proposal foresaw another of these group of governmental experts, and another proposal, for the first time ever, a so-called open-ended working group. Open-ended meaning that all member states of the United Nations would have the possibility to participate in the discussion. There was, in the end, no agreement to have the one or the other or a combined version. Both proposals were adopted in 2018, so we had these two processes starting at the same time. I was asked, invited, or Switzerland was invited to chair the open-ended working group, so that was my job. So not starting from scratch. Both had the GGE, the new GGE, and the open-ended working group had basically a very similar mandate, looking at these four elements of the existing framework, discuss whether and how it should be developed. In addition, have a discussion on current threats in cyberspace for peace and security, plus our group had the additional mandate to look into future ways, formats of dialogue among member states on the issue. So that's where we set out in early 2019. The decision was 2018, and we actually started work in the fall of 2019. The plan at that point was to have 3 sessions, substantive sessions around the issue, and then come up with our report by June 2020. We were actually able to have 2 of these sessions in September 2019 and in February 2020. And then the pandemic hit, and we had to change our plan of work. We had to adapt. We first went into exchanges between delegations in written form, by exchanging emails and positions that we would publish on the website. Then we went into a series of virtual meetings, had to extend our own deadline, and finally had the last meeting not in June 2020, but in March 2021, a hybrid meeting in New York, where we were able to adopt the report. Throughout the process, what was very impressive for all of us and interesting was that there was a very high level of participation. A lot of member states participated in the meetings. Were either present in the meetings we were still able to have in a traditional forum in New York, or later in the virtual meetings, followed the discussions, made contributions, very substantive statements, which really underlined that the issue of the impact of ICT on peace and security is of interest to everybody, that almost all member states really have a concern about understanding what's happening and having a voice also when there are decisions taken on how to address this. Beyond the member states, we had a very large group of stakeholders, so-called stakeholders, following our discussions, participating as much as possible, providing contributions, proposals, a very open process. I've been trying from the start and throughout the process to be as transparent in our discussions as possible and as inclusive as possible. There was even one meeting in December 2019, which we called an intersessional multi-stakeholder meeting, where representatives of civil society, different categories, meaning academia, traditional civil society, the private sector, came together and exchanged with member states on the issue. So that was really one, I think, if not a key element of the process, this opportunity to make it really open-ended, to really make it transparent, to really make it inclusive. We had a few challenges, of course. One challenge was certainly the fact that in the beginning there were these 2 competing processes, and not a consensus on the mandate of either one of these groups. that fortunately we were able to overcome. I also have to say that I very much appreciated the delegations that were initially very skeptical towards the mandate of the Open Ended Working Group. Always were ready to engage, participating in the discussion, and were there throughout the process. Another challenge was that because it was the first time that we had this open-ended format, we had like two different groups of delegations. One group that had been part of the previous discussions and that were regularly part of the smaller government expert groups that had people with long-standing experiences in the field, whereas many other delegations came to this issue for the first time. So we had to spend quite a bit of time in the beginning of the process to try to bring everybody on a common level. Thanks to the very strong engagement from delegations and delegates, I think we were able to overcome that. And then, of course, we had a very large variety on positions and opinions on the issues. And there were the geopolitical tensions. I don't have to go into detail. So quite a few challenges, to which, of course, then came also the COVID that made us change our work plans several times and need to adapt our working methods. There was a number of helpful elements also. As I mentioned, the interest was very strong, and I felt it was increasing even during these 18 months we were in the process. As I mentioned before, due to the COVID, our collective reliance on ICTs, on cyber technology and all this communication technology increased by the week, and this also increased the vulnerability, but also the awareness for the vulnerability of this technology, and hence the necessity to address these vulnerabilities, to find ways of containing the risks, but at the same time also to promote the opportunities that technology still provide, of course. So a very strong effort, a very strong recognition of the importance and the urgency of the issue, and the strong will to come together again, to rebuild the consensus that had somehow been lost after 2015. And then if I just want to mention this year, one additional really good element and really helpful was a wonderful, very strong, fantastic support I had as a chair from the UN, from the UN Secretariat. They built a support team of people who are very familiar with the previous processes, who knew the substance very well, helping me as chair. What we came up with in the end was a report with two parts. A more formal part, a substantive report that essentially reaffirmed the normative framework of 2015 that I was talking about. The important element, of course, was that now it's been reaffirmed by all members of the member states of the United Nations. In addition to the reaffirming, we were able to add a few additional elements. There are some elements in the threat assessment, in particular about the vulnerability of health infrastructure, attacks we saw during COVID against hospitals, scientific installations, and a common agreement among member states that was, on the one hand, a serious threat, and on the other hand, not acceptable. Some clarifications about the order between international law and non-binding norms. So a very important, strong reaffirmation of the existing normative framework, plus some additional elements. And then in the second part of the report, which was a chair's paper, a paper under my responsibility, a large compendium of proposals and ideas on which there was no consensus among member states, but at least member states agreed to bring them together in a paper under my responsibility. And many ideas and proposals therein, I hope and I believe, will be an important basis for the continued discussion in a new open-ended working group, maybe in several other places, international level, regional level, national level, a very important part of the report. So again, I'm very happy about the outcome. It was not clear, not many believed that we would succeed in finding consensus. We did, thanks to the delegations who had this strong will of coming together, thanks to the delegates who were ready to compromise where necessary for the greater good. And I feel that I hope and I feel that this report is a very strong contribution to consensus around the normative framework and as a basis also for further discussions. There's a few more elements I could mention, but that are in there, but maybe I want to stop here. I just one more point: the role of youth. I thought throughout the process there was two elements where youth played a very important role. On the one hand, we had a number of young diplomats in the room, be it real or virtual, who contributed their knowledge and their experience with technology in a way that my generation is already not possible of doing, who have a better understanding of the technology, a better idea of the possible consequences. And many delegations were actively bringing along younger colleagues, and that was very helpful. There was one particular program I want to mention that had been sponsored by countries such as Canada and some Scandinavians and the Netherlands, with young female cyber diplomats from all over the world, in particular Africa, Asia, the Pacific, the Caribbean. Fantastic contributions that had a really strong contribution, a strong role to play towards the positive outcome. And then, of course, you yourself, your group, your report, your contributions as a stakeholder, that was reflected on our website, all open to everybody to see, and it's an inspiration to anybody who was looking for solutions. So 2 ways already where I felt youth made an important contribution to the process. Sorry if I was a little long, happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, in fact, no, thank you very much. It was a wonderful overview of the whole process. And I really like the picture of Geneva that is behind you. And it's very symbolic of this city of peace and of the international cooperation. This is the image that resonates for many around the world. And what you have told us in this process with the open-ended working group is that peace and security has throughout been absolutely central. And this is at the essence of the mandate of the United Nations that have been created after the Second World War. So I think it positions the importance of cybersecurity, this open-ended working group, and the work of, I hope, the next one, and also the closed-end groups at a very, very high level for all sectors. You mentioned the health sector, especially now during the pandemic. You mentioned, of course, national security. You mentioned the area of also malicious use in cyberspace. So we're talking cybercrime, amongst other things. And the fact that you brought in all of the countries on board and were able to reach consensus, including the contribution of different stakeholders, and that of course includes youth, I think is absolutely fantastic. And on this, I wonder if our students are ready for their questions, and I will have also a question for you after to them. Yes, so please, for the first question.
Yes, thank you so much. Mr. Ambassador, what should happen for the wider public, from junior to senior, to be interested in cybersecurity?
I think it's very important that you, as a group, and many other groups, of course, continue what you're doing. You're bringing out your message of the importance of the issue through social media, through many other channels, and people need to understand again that cyber is everywhere now. It influences anything we do. And I think that the broader audience has a good understanding for the fundamental importance of peace and security. And, Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, famously said, there is no development without peace. There is no peace without development. Neither one of them is going to happen without human rights. Now, all of these three pillars, peace and security, sustainable development, human rights, is very strongly influenced by cyber technology. And if we are not addressing this in the new ways, and if we're not thinking about how cyber technology impacts on these three levels, and I still think security is maybe, they're equal, but maybe security, peace and security is really central. If I look at the preamble also of the UN Charter, where it talks about preventing or saving future generations from the scourge of war, peace and security is really a central aspect. And we need to think about the impact of cyber technology on this. We need to explain it to people. We need to look at what the risks are, and we need to find ways of containing those risks. I don't think it's too hard. I think people, everybody over the last 18 months, almost everywhere around the world has become aware, or more aware than in the past, of the influence of our dependence on cyber technology and what the impact is of this in all aspects of our lives. And people like you and I, who are very interested in this, it's our responsibility to talk about this to our friends, to our family, to audiences when we have an opportunity to make them understand. And the more they understand, the more we as diplomats will have support in our work and also support to find common solutions.
Thank you. Second question, please.
Mr. Ambassador, we hear that nation states are sponsoring attacks on other countries against critical infrastructure and interfering with elections. When is an attack a crime, and when does it become an act of war? Is this on the United Nations Security Council agenda? Was it part of open-ended working group work?
Excellent question. Thank you so much. I think again the issue itself was at the center of the mandate of the open-ended working group. What's the impact of cyber technology on peace and security? What's happening out there? What are the threats? What could happen even beyond that? What we're seeing today? And you're right. Almost every day when I open the newspaper, there is some incident reported from somewhere in the world where cyber technology was interfering either with the security of companies or with infrastructure that is very critical and has close or has indeed a security relevance. What we need to discuss, and this is very sensitive and politically very complicated, is how do we identify this kind of incidents? How do we determine where they originated from? How do we attribute responsibility for these incidents? How do we react as an international community if the state that is ultimately responsible is either unable or unwilling to react? What are possible ways of reacting to that? These are discussions we need to have. At the same time, you are not naive. You know exactly what's happening inside the world, how complicated these discussions are. They are very sensitive, but I feel we need to see how we can have these discussions, because they need to be held in order to contain the risks that we are facing in the impact of cyber technology on peace and security.
Thank you. The third question, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. My question touches more upon the future because we believe cybersecurity has become a universal priority and it's essential for the fulfillment of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So why is there not a specific goal dedicated to cybersecurity? And as a follow-up, as the outcome of this conference, how can we submit to the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly the need for an 18th Sustainable Development Goal dedicated to cybersecurity?
That's a really good question. I'm a great fan of the 2030 Agenda, and I believe it is in its 17 goals. It's only universal. It covers pretty much everything. It covers in particular also, again, these 3 pillars that I mentioned, the independence between development, but also human rights and security. So I think if you want to, I think there's a way of reading this into the SDGs. Because when you talk about security, peace and security, when you say you need to take measures to preserve and protect peace and security in order to enable sustainable development and the full enjoyment of human rights, you don't talk about the means of warfare. And today, if cyber technology threatens peace and security, then indirectly that is addressed as well. But at the same time, I agree with you. We need to continue raising awareness for the issue, making it an issue of discussion, bringing it to the relevant bodies of the United Nations on a global level, bringing it to the discussion on a regional level and on a national level. So continue the discussion we had in the open-ended working group. What are the threats? What are we facing? What's happening out there? What are also, as you said, looking into the future? New technology is coming at us in an always faster pace. We need to try to anticipate what's going on instead of always just reacting. And then what are the answers to that? Is it, do we need to develop the norms further? Do we need to find better ways of implementing the norms? Should we increase capacity building to make the ICT infrastructure or other infrastructure less vulnerable? All of these discussions have to continue. I'm encouraged by your question because I know you will push us and you will yourself take every opportunity to bring these discussions into Security Council, General Assembly, many more forward that are out there.
Ambassador Lauber, thank you so much. We are delighted that you think this is an interesting topic to address in the context of the SDGs. We have a question that keeps coming back, and we keep hearing it from the students. As you said, our students are absolutely clear on the importance of cybersecurity and of education and of greater awareness. However, despite the fact that it's a top priority for the United Nations, it's a top priority for the international organizations and countries around the world, students keep telling us that some of their professors, that some of their friends, and in general, people around them are not so concerned about cybersecurity, and they think that this is a niche topic, or at least this is what they keep hearing. This is a topic for experts, and it's certainly not for me, probably not for you. Is cybersecurity really important, or is it a niche topic for experts, or is it for each and every one of us?
I think it's clear that it's important for each and every one for us. It doesn't necessarily mean that each and every one of us has to immediately do something about it. You know, we all have our specific experience and responsibilities, but it needs to be dealt with at least by the people who are responsible. So your colleagues mentioned some of the bodies that are built specifically to deal with peace and security issues, and they need to think, what's the impact of cyber technology? But maybe we need to raise the bar a little bit and to extend the circle of those who are interested. And I can just repeat what I said before. You know, in the end, I'm sitting now in Geneva. You said a lot of lovely things about Geneva, and that makes me very proud and very happy. But we are in Switzerland, and in particular in Geneva, why do we make such an effort to make this a city of peace and to try to use this the city as a platform for people to come together and discuss how to preserve peace? Because we know very well that our prosperity, a country in Switzerland, very similar to Poland, in the middle of Europe, very much interlinked with the countries around us and globally, also through, not least through tourism, through commerce, exchange of people. We need global peace and we need global stability. That's the fundamental condition of our prosperity. If we don't have that, if we have insecurity, if we have conflict, then we will suffer, everybody else will suffer. And now, increasingly, we realize that cyber technology can be, doesn't have to, but can be one of the threats for international peace and security. So we need absolutely look into this. We need to think about what are the actual threats, what can happen, and how do we contain that. And we need to do this on national level, and we need to do it on regional level, and we need to do it on international level, because cyber technology is one of these typical issues, like climate change, like migration, like others, that are transboundary. They don't know, they don't respect national borders. You mentioned, some of your students mentioned it, attacks are often, or not, quite often launched in one country, they have an impact in another. So we need cooperation between governments, between countries, exchanging our assessment of the threats, exchanging best practices on how to address it, really again to try to contain the risks and preserve peace and security. It's a new form, it's a new threat to peace and security, but it's fundamentally important.
Well, thank you so much. I think this really wraps it up, and I think it really provides the kind of perspective that we were looking for, and that certainly our students are looking at sharing with the wider student community and in general with within the universities, but also outside. I think as you are the ambassador that has been able to carry this process for 2 years, the students that are participating in this conference are also the ambassadors for this topic around the world in their communities, and they have a role to play that fits into the UN agenda. It fits into the Sustainable Development Agenda, into human rights questions, and into global peace and security. And of course, the economy is at the center of it. There's no development, as you said, without peace and without human rights. So, Ambassador Lauber, it's always a pleasure to see you. It's always a pleasure to discuss with you. And I hope that next time we'll be able to meet up in person. As much as technology is fantastic because we are able to connect everyone around the world, it's also wonderful to be able to see each other in person.
I'd love to, Adam, and I really want to thank you again for having me. This was exciting, and I can't agree more with you about what you said of the role of your students. And I want to also thank the students here for your interest. This is extremely encouraging, and also you really play an important role. I'm not just saying this because you invited me to talk here. I really truly believe that, and I want to thank you for taking up this responsibility. And if there is any which way I can support you in this, please let me know. I also want to underline again how these kind of things, if you succeed in this kind of processes, it's never one person. It's teamwork. It's a lot of people are involved, and I'll be happy to the ones who I'm still working with, and I meet very regularly to pass on your very kind remarks. So thank you very, very much again for having me.
Thank you so much, and to very soon. General Alexander, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How are you doing?
It is an absolute pleasure to have you with us and with our students around the world. With, in fact, students not only from around the world, from all different fields, and also anyone interested in cybersecurity, experts. I'm not sure if you were able to participate in the beginning of the session. Margot gave a biography and introduction of your profile, and let me just maybe say in a couple of words that you have been running the National Security Agency, you have been running US Cyber Command, and now you have focused your efforts on private sector initiatives and on IronNet security in order to work on the topic of collective defense. We are absolutely delighted to have you with us and to see your perspective, as much a perspective on national security as one on how to help governments around the world, how to help private sector enterprise, and how to work together on cooperation and the question of collaboration. We often think of cybersecurity and in the context of attacks and cyber attacks, less in terms of collective defense. And I think that's a fascinating topic.
Well, it's an honor to be here, Adam. I know Bruce is on here and Colonel Erickson is on. So you have a great set of panels. And I just heard the end part of the ambassador talk. So thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. So please, we have a few questions for you that we have 3 questions from students, and I have an additional questions and maybe additional questions if time allows. And so the whole scene, I mean, the world scene is yours for this talk.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Go ahead.
Well, I welcome you to tell us a little bit about collective defense and also how you see the role of cooperation and working together in order to develop a set of defenses in the cyber world.
Well, absolutely, because this is a passion for me. How do you defend companies, sectors, states, and nations in cybersecurity? Heretofore, essentially every company has been defending itself. If you think about it, the rapid rate of technological change in terms of the amount of data, the number of devices, the protocols that are facing our cybersecurity people, it's growing at a phenomenal rate. It's doubling every year. And we can't double the number of people that we have. We want them to be the best trained, give them the best tools. But right now, essentially, they defend themselves. There is no picture that exists between the government and the private sector. And so what happens, and you've seen that here in the US, when major attacks go on, like SolarWinds, the government did not see it. It hit 18,000 companies. Then, after the fact, the government gets knowledge of it. But we need the government to prevent attacks, not to be there for incident response. So how do you do that? Same thing happened in the Microsoft hack, 30,000 companies. Then we saw the ransomware attack on Colonial. And just over the last few days, you've seen the USAID attack with the recent set of things, also from Russia. We're seeing this grow exponentially, and the risks are getting much higher for our country, for your country, for all countries. It's not only criminal activity, it's nation state activity. Cyber is being used as an element of national power. So how do we defend against that? If you think about it today, and I use the analogy of 90 mid-sized banks. I was surprised when I got out of government how many banks there were. I guess it makes sense, that's where all the money is. But imagine 90 mid-sized banks, each with 10 people working the best they can to defend that bank. And down the road is another bank with 10 people doing the best they can to defend that bank. And every year, the amount of information, the data, and everything is doubling. They can't keep up, and they're not going to hire another 10 people every year or double their size every year. So what do? Right now, they're losing. Now imagine if those 90 banks had their 10 people each work together, collective defense, that would be 900 people working together for the collective defense. And if we anonymize that data and made it only threat information, think of a radar picture for a nation. That radar picture would show us attacks that are going on within those banks so they could better defend. And you could share that anonymized information with the government. When I say anonymized, there's no content of communications, no personally identifiable information, no intellectual property. It is threat-related information that's hitting those companies. More importantly, in doing that, those 900 people could share knowledge and crowdsource. Now imagine a nation that works together in this area. That's what we need to do in cybersecurity between our public and private sector. As I looked at this from my perspective in government, you have all of these niche products. We need the cybersecurity companies to work together, and you can see that happening. You're getting more and more companies working together, partnering. And we need companies on the commercial sector to be willing to share, and we're getting great traction here to do the same thing, and in Poland and elsewhere. So I think that's the future of cybersecurity. Imagine now where we could share this information between countries. So we could show, here's an attack that's going on in Eastern Europe. And here's the impact of that attack. Let the world see it versus it being something that people say, well, it wasn't us, it wasn't us. We can show it. Let's show how those attacks are and take this off the table. I was asked once by Secretary Gates, what would this do to our offense? And my comment was, if we could defend the nation 100% and minimize our offense, that's the best thing for our countries, because we lose more in cyber than we gain. We need to take this off the table. And you're seeing right now in our country that this is being used as an element of national power by Russia going after our government. And again, with the recent USA attack, again, getting greater access. China going after intellectual property with a Microsoft hack. And then criminals. A number of ransomware attacks. The biggest one was the Colonial Pipeline, but there's hundreds of others that are hitting us. We're not ready to defend in this space if we remain every company for itself. You can't win in that game. We have to work together. So when I think about collective defense, I think about the opportunity to build what our nations need in a collective defense strategy, everyone working together. I think that's the future of cybersecurity. And if we do that, there are other things that we can do that take this the next step. That information that we collect together, hunters can use to find anomalies and find the threat in our systems and share it, point it out, and stop it. That is the future of cybersecurity. So from my perspective, we have to go to collective defense. We will get there. It is the most logical thing. When you think about it, it kind of makes me smile a little bit when you think about, we created the internet. You got all these companies working together, communicating on the internet. Yet everybody defends themselves. Think about that. And when you think about that, Adam, what you immediately say is, well, that doesn't make sense. Of course we should work together. Now we've got to figure out how to work together, minimize liability here in our country, and attribution on who's being hit, but share that information. And I think we will get there. You're seeing more and more people take that on as a strategy for our country and for others. So that's my view on collective defense.
Well, I think it's wonderful how you've been able to make a case for collective defense. I mean, in a few minutes, on something that sounds so obvious and yet is simply not happening, or at least not yet. Although in the healthcare sector, we see health institutions, hospitals, and others with very limited resources, and all of a sudden they have been hit from all sides, and they had no choice. So they had to work together. They had to join forces with others, and I think sometimes with more success, sometimes less. But they are attempting to do exactly what you have described, And having realized that, in fact, yes, exactly, we lose more than we gain by not having these capabilities and by not sharing this information with others that are able to help. So
Yeah, you bring out a great point that I should have mentioned. When I talk about sharing, I'm talking about not sharing signature-based information because that's already been shared. So if you think about it, that's what we use on our endpoints, that's what we use on our firewall. I'm talking about sharing behavioral anomalies and using behavioral analytics or network detection and response as the glue. Don't do away with signatures because they take away what we know. That's the known known. Take that off the table. Have everybody do the best they can on vulnerabilities and on patching the known knowns. Now, what about those that get through, or mistakes that happen, or phishing things that get through your enterprise? That's where behavioral analytics come in. They're hard, so you need behavioral analytics with an expert system and people trained to hunt in that area. And that's where this collective defense strategy really takes off, because now what we're doing is we're blocking what we know. When we find something, we can say we know it, create a signature, create a behavior, block that, share that with everybody, share the knowledge, and go after it very quickly. Hundreds of people working on the same issue, we're going to knock this out of the park. That's what we have to do. We have to get really good at sharing information about behaviors as well as signatures. And I think the signatures is well understood. And that's where we are today. And we see in the SolarWinds attack as an example, signatures did not work because they got through. And we see the same thing on the recent USAID attack. They got through. And Microsoft and the Colonial Pipeline. So what we have to add to it is behavioral analytics, network detection and response, and have that talk to the endpoints, to the firewall, to the SIM, and act as a glue that brings that together. And then share that behavioral anomalies in the cloud so other companies can share and correlate across that. I think that's the approach that I'm talking about.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. We do have some questions from students. I think they are very eager to ask you. So we have 3 questions, and I have a closing one that we ask from all our guest speakers. The first question, please.
General Alexander, you have been leading the NSA and the Cyber Command under the Bush and Obama administrations. How has the cybersecurity landscape changed, and why did you decide to set up IronNet? Also, how has also also, are there any major changes with the Biden White House when it comes to cybersecurity?
Okay, so 3 questions there that I'll try to hit consecutively, and thanks for asking those. And thanks, I'm sorry, I don't speak your language, so thank you for putting it in English for me. So I know that's hard, and I greatly appreciate that. So first, in the Biden and the Bush administrations, I served for almost 9 years in the NSA and Cyber Command for both those. I saw both of them work about the same. It was interesting that technology did change. You hit a key point. In 2007, the iPhone came out. And when you think about what that did to our digital landscape, it changed everything. You can now do on your phone things that you couldn't do in other areas. And so this rapidly changed the way we think about cybersecurity and where we go. And at the same time, most of your communications were a mixture of analog and digital, 2005, 6, and 7. And then they switched almost entirely to digital, and the iPhone really pushed that forward. And so these new phones, the Samsung and the iPhone, got us to this new digital environment. great news because we can share across all these applications and all these things grew significantly and it changed. And I think it was interesting to witness that. Why did I start up IronNet? Well, the reason was when I was in government, I tried to get others to do this collective defense strategy in behavioral analytics. And the commercial company said it was too hard. I should have listened. It is hard, but it's actually doable. We got the best behavioral scientists in the world to work with us to develop analytics to work in this area. We created an expert system in machine learning to address this problem. I felt that I could still serve our country and our allies in the commercial sector. I didn't have to stop. And you see folks like Bruce Schneer and others who are going to be on, they've done the same thing. They've used their life to help the greater good. And I think we can do the same here. And so we wanted to create a place where cyber is a secure space. How do we do that? And that's what IronNet was formed for. And we have as our motto, the mission continues. Now, with respect to the Biden administration, I was really pleased to see the first steps that they've taken with the executive order. Specifically, that in that first page, they talk about the public-private partnership and the need for sharing. I think we need to go further, and I've said that publicly on TV yesterday, that it needs to be further, but it's a great step. And they're hiring some great people. So I think that's really good, and I think the Biden administration is addressing this cybersecurity as an existential threat to our country, and they're going after it. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Third question, please.
So, General Alexander, ethical hackers inform corporations of security weaknesses in their products. They inform the public when companies do not fix the problems. Corporations often prefer taking legal actions instead of solving the problem. Are these hackers dangerous criminals or heroes?
Well, it depends on the intent. I think that's a great question. It depends on the intent of what they're doing. Do they intend to cause harm or do they intend to fix it? And how do they do it? So it's a combination of both. You can intend to fix it and cause great damage, so you don't want to do that, or liability. So from my perspective, if they're really sincere about doing it, sharing it with the companies and with the cyber community, those that actually have to defend against it is a way to help fix that. And there are a number of companies that are out there doing that. There are a lot of vulnerabilities. You bring out a huge question. I think companies do the best they can, and there's work now in this new executive order to what they have to do for supply chain, software supply chain security, all the things you have to go through. But even with that, as you know, there will be vulnerabilities in software. People will find them, people will use them, and now what we have to do is to defend against them. I think in this public-private partnership and sharing, not only amongst commercial companies, but between the government and the commercial sector, those things that are known by government can be shared anonymously and protect the companies in that country and their allies. So I think that's going to be part of the future. And I think the real answer to your question is, let's get out and start solving these problems and work together. And then those that find it will be heroes, as long as they do it right. Thank you for your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Next question, please.
General Alexander, the FBI asked Apple to unlock the phones of terrorists, and in some cases, the terrorists destroy their phones before being killed, which means that these phones had important information. How do we balance national security with individual privacy rights and freedoms?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Could you say that again, please?
Yes, of course. So we know that FBI asked Apple to unlock the phones of terrorists, but some of them managed to destroy their phones before being killed, which means that these phones had important information. And how do we balance national security with individual privacy and freedom?
Okay, so that's a great question. Thank you for that. That is an excellent question. and ones that governments wrestle with all the time. It's not just the FBI, but the National Security Council here in our country, all the way up to the president. What do you do? How do you do that right? And you bring in justice. I'll give you my thoughts on it. Now, I'm no longer in government, so I can tell you what I think. And here's what I think. If a person's life is on the line, the life is more important than the privacy. Save the person, stop the attack. You have to have a way of doing that and protecting people's intellectual property, their personally identifiable information, and the content of their communications. I think you can do both. And actually, it was my experience that governments do really good at that. I know ours does. Even though in the papers it says they're listening to your phone calls, they're reading your emails, that's not true. What we go through are court orders and ways of doing that when I was in government. And it's interesting because everybody says, well, I'm not sure we trust you. And so they had a presidential review commission done. And one of the board members on that commission was a advisory board member of the American Civil Liberties Union. And so you think, okay, they're going to find out and beat these guys up and show them how bad they really are. But that individual, when he saw what we were doing after 5 weeks, came up to me and said, you people have the greatest integrity of any government agency I've seen. You're doing exactly what we've asked you to do. That individual is Jeffrey Stone, and he was the acting chair of the law school at Chicago University and that board member of the ACLU. So I think you can do both. It takes discipline and oversight to make sure that you do it right. But you have a great question that people wrestle with all the time. Is it security or privacy? And what the governments try to do is they're going to defend the nation. You don't want a huge terrorist attack to go on. So what you're going to do is you're going to say, I want you to defend the country, but here's how I want you to do it to make sure we protect people's civil liberties and privacy. I think you can do both. It's tougher, but it's important to do that. We've told our citizens that we would do that, and we do. I think we do a good job at that. Thank you for your question.
General Alexander, thank you so much. I think I will have an easier question for you, which really wraps up everything that you've said. And this is a question we ask from every speaker. Is cybersecurity a niche topic for a small group of experts, or is it something that everyone should be interested in and concerned about?
I think it's the latter. This is something everybody should be interested in and learn about. I have 16 grandchildren. I know I don't look that old, thank you very much. But I have 16 grandchildren. And I want them to be able to get out on the internet and to look at what's going on around our world, to make sure that we have the safest environment on that internet, that they're protected, that they can do things, that they can learn and grow. I think that's part of our future. And from my perspective, that's the important step. It's not a niche topic. Look at how fast and how far it's evolving. Other things will come in, like quantum computing. All these network-related things are going to go on. It's an amazing time. I am just really impressed with what's going on in artificial intelligence and machine learning and in cybersecurity. I think this will be an area that first will be a great contest between nations. And you're seeing that start to play out now as nations use cyber as an element of national power. And now nations are going to use this. And in between, we're all on the internet as civilians and commercial companies. And from some of those, we're the target. The economy is what makes our nations great. And that's what's at risk. We now need to figure out how to work those together. And this is an enduring issue that will face all of our countries. And I believe it is the reason that we have to work together. So based on the questions that you asked, the three students that asked questions, you can see why we created companies like ours, what hackers and others can do to help defend for the good, and how we protect civil liberties and privacy. All of those are things that are part of this issue. We should talk about it. We should do the right thing. No person, myself included, has all the knowledge in this area. We need people to come together and discuss the problem and come up with the best solutions and to learn and grow. So why I was so interested in working here, talking to you all, is for just that reason. You are part of the future. You're the ones that are going to carry this the next step. You're the generation that will now face cyber both as an existential threat to your nation and the greatest opportunity for economic growth. How do we do both? Where do you come down on all the issues that you just asked? And how do we take this on? I think that's our future. So, Adam, it is an honor and a privilege to be here.
Thank you so much for being with us. Your talk was absolutely fantastic. I think everyone around the world, all of the students are honored that you have agreed to spend a few minutes with us. And if we could, we'd love to talk to you for much longer. But we have to move on now. Bruce Schneier is waiting on the line.
Yep. Bruce is great. So thanks, Adam. You take care.
General Alexander, thank you. Bruce.
Hey there.
I'm so happy that you're with us today.
You know, it's a holiday here in the US, so you should be doubly impressed that I'm here.
I'm extremely impressed. We're all very happy. And in fact, I know that in your busy agendas, I think having the lineup of speakers that we have would only be possible on a holiday. Otherwise, we'd have to be competing with everything else that you are doing. Bruce, Margot has given a full biography. I don't want to take up any more of the time. I'd love to give you the scene. And the name of your talk is Click Here to Kill Everybody. And that's the name of your book. And I think it's a wonderful setup for your talk.
Yeah, I just want to talk for a few minutes and then go to the questions, because questions sound interesting. And actually, I will take Keith's questions again. Those were good questions, and I would answer them differently. I want to talk about a world where everything is becoming a computer. And that's really the world we're living in, right? I mean, this is not a phone. This is a small portable computer that happens to make phone calls. And very similar extent, a modern refrigerator is a computer that keeps things cold, and a microwave oven is a computer that makes things hot, and an ATM machine is a computer with money inside. Your car is a computer with 4 wheels and an engine, or really what it is, it's a 100+ computer distributed system with 4 wheels and an engine. And I think this is a really important change in our world, that everything is becoming computerized and connected. It's the Internet of Things, but it really is more than that. It is this pervasive world where everything is computerized and connected. And that's where we're living. And when you think about this world, we deal with the traditional problems of computer security in this new environment. And the things that matter here are automation, autonomy, and physical agency. And those are the 3 things that are changing. It's what the computers are attached to and what they do. So traditionally, when you think about computer security, let me step back. There is something called the CIA triad. It's not that CIA, it's a different CIA. It stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are the 3 properties that we are expected to provide as computer security professionals. And traditionally, when there is a story in the news of a vulnerability and an attack, it's a confidentiality story, right? And that's, Equifax, Office Personnel Management, that is the Microsoft hack, the Chinese hack against Microsoft Office, that's SolarWinds, everything in the news. But the threats are in many forms, right? Availability attacks, right? DDoS is an availability attack. Ransomware is an availability attack. Colonial Pipeline. It actually was data theft and data availability. They're integrity attacks. Right? If I hack into a bank and change the bank balances, I'm not stealing any data, but by attacking the integrity of the data, I end up stealing money. And when you think about this world of physically capable computers, the integrity and availability threats are much worse than the confidentiality threats. When you think of Colonial Pipeline, the fact that data was stolen was a big deal. The fact that the computers were locked up and the oil couldn't move was a much bigger deal. So when you think about these physically capable computers, they become real risks to life and property. Right? So while I'm concerned if someone hacks my bank and steals my private patient medical records, I'm much more concerned if they change my blood type, right? Data integrity attack. And I don't want them hacking my car, turning on the Bluetooth microphone and listening to my conversations, but I really don't want them disabling the brakes. That's a data availability attack. Right? So when you think about cars, medical devices, drones, weapon systems, thermostats, power plants, smart city, anything, the integrity and availability attacks are much more important. So we worry about DDoS against pipelines and power plants, ransomware against your car. But there is this fundamental difference between, I know, your spreadsheet crashes and you lose your data, and your embedded heart monitor crashes and you lose your life. And it could be the exact same CPU and operating system and application software and vulnerability and attack tool and attack, right? The only thing different is what the computer is attached to and what it can do. That's where the risk is. And in this world, some of our long-standing security assumptions no longer work. I'm going to mention 3 of them. So the first one is patching. Right? Patching is how we get security. We don't know as professionals how to write secure systems out of the box. So instead, we've built this security system of agility. Right? We patch computers when we find vulnerabilities. Actually, there are 2 reasons our phones, our computers are as secure as they are. The first is there's a team of security engineers at Apple, in this case, at Microsoft, at Google, who designed them to be as secure as they can in the first place. And the second is those engineers are on staff to quickly write and disseminate patches when new vulnerabilities are discovered. That's how it works. And you know how often you patch your Windows machine, how often there's an Apple patch. These are all fixing vulnerabilities. So this ecosystem doesn't work for low-cost embedded systems like home routers, like DVRs, like thermostats. They're not designed in the same way. They're often built offshore by third parties. Teams of engineers come together, build them, and then disperse. Right? They don't have long-standing security engineering teams available. Even worse, many of these devices have no way to patch. Right now, the way you patch your home router is you throw it away and buy a new one. And that's the patch mechanism. We don't have another. But it's actually a pretty decent security system. And the fact that we replace our phones, our computers every 3 to 5 years gives us security, right? Each version is more secure than the past. That doesn't work for embedded systems, right? You're going to replace your DVR, every 5 to 10 years? You're going to replace your refrigerator every 25 years? A couple of years ago, I bought a new home thermostat. I expect to replace it approximately never. And, if you think about, let's say you buy a car today. I don't know, let's make this up. The software is 2 years old. You buy it, you drive it for 10 years, sell it, somebody else buys it, they drive for 10 years, they sell it. At this point, it probably gets put in a boat, sent to somewhere in the third world. In my country, it'll get sent to Latin America. If you're in Europe, it'll get sent to Africa. Someone else buys it, they drive another 10 to 20 years. All right, you try to find a computer from 1979 try to boot it up, try to make it secure. We actually have no idea how to maintain 40-year-old consumer software. We haven't a clue. But there is a reason Microsoft and Apple depreciate their operating systems every couple of generations. It's hard to maintain the old stuff. And those in industries where there is old stuff, finance, manufacturing, it's really hard. And we're going to be living in a world where those things, and they're going to be toys, they're going to be home appliances, are going to be on the internet working, unsecurable, unpatchable. And we just don't know how to fix this. Second thing that's starting to fail is authentication, which has kind of only just barely worked. Right? Human memorizable passwords are bad for a lot of situations. Two-factor is great, but not suitable in many cases. Backup authentication systems are terrible. But what's going to change is the amount of authenticating that we're going to do. So when we authenticate, it's either one of two things. I'm actually going to demonstrate them both. So you're either authenticating to a device. I just logged into my iPhone, or you authenticate to a remote service. I just checked my email. Now you saw that was super easy. And we're good at that. What we are going to see the rise of is thing-to-thing authentication. And the Internet of Things, 5G, is not about you watching Netflix faster. It's about things talking to other things behind your back. And all of those interconnected devices are going to be talking to each other. And they'll need to authenticate with each other. So if you think about 100 IoT devices in your ecosystem, and they need to talk to each other, that's 10,000 authentications. You have 1,000 devices, that's 1,000,000 authentications. We don't know how to do that. Or think of some kind of driverless car environment where a given car has to authenticate with thousands of other cars and road signs and traffic signals and alert messages, all ad hoc, all in real time. We don't know how to do that. We have some inklings of it. I mean, right now, when I step into my car, this device automatically authenticates the car. It uses the microphone and speakers. That's great. That's Bluetooth. Now, but if you remember Bluetooth, you set that up manually, right? I had to pair my phone with my car. And I'll do that 10 times. I'll do that 25 times. I'm not doing that 10,000 times. I'm not doing that 1,000,000 times. Bluetooth doesn't scale. We have hubs right now. If you have an IoT anything, you likely control it from your phone. This is now the de facto IoT controller hub. And that also will work for 10 things or 25 things, not for 100, not for 1,000. So we don't have a system of authentication that can handle what's coming. The third thing that's failing is supply chain, which I think of as an insurmountably hard problem. So it's taken many forms. In the past few years, the debate was largely about Huawei. Right? Should we trust Chinese-made networking equipment? The year before that, there was a debate about Kaspersky. Should we trust Russian-made antivirus equipment? This is not just in the U.S. 2014, China banned Kaspersky and the U.S. company Symantec. 2017, India banned a bunch of Chinese smartphone apps. Back in 1997, there was a debate about Checkpoint. Should we trust an Israeli security company? Now, actually, this is a really important question, right? Can you trust a product built in a company whose government you don't trust? But that is just one part of a much more complex question. This is a US product, but it was not made in the US. Its chips were not fabbed in the US. Its programmers carry, 150 different passports? But supply chain security is much more than the finished product. We have discovered backdoors in Juniper firewalls and D-Link routers, both US companies. You have to trust the development process. We have seen hacked software libraries. You have to trust the distribution mechanism. We've seen faked apps in the Google Play Store. You have to trust the update mechanism. Right? SolarWinds was an attack on an update, not Petya. Was distributed through a hacked update of a Ukrainian accounting package. You have to trust the shipping mechanism. One of the Snowden documents showed NSA employees intercepting a Cisco router destined to the Syrian telephone company to install a backdoor. Right? You can actually hack an iPhone through a malicious replacement screen. So when you think about supply chain, it is a much more robust problem. Right? You have to trust everyone, yet you can't trust anyone. And there's no obvious solution. Or you can imagine a US-only iPhone, it'll cost 10 times as much, nobody will buy it. Our industry is deeply, deeply international at every level. In a way, we will never go back to some kind of nationalistic tech infrastructure. But we have no good solution to this. So in some ways, right, it's a little bit of a perfect storm. Security is failing just as everything is becoming interconnected. And what I write about a lot is the need for regulation, and the need for government to step in and provide security assurances because the tech alone can't do it. So with that, I'm happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm very glad that you raised a number of things, the supply chain aspects, the regulation, of course, that is one of the topics of the open-ended working group, and that keeps coming back as well. Let's go straight to the questions if our students are ready. Yes, please, for the first question.
Yeah, Mr. Schneider, thanks for your speech and for your works and blog and books. So I have a question that is maybe challenging but very interesting. As we see every day, technological progress is everywhere, but security is rarely given priority in the innovation process. Patches are added to fix the vulnerabilities. Even in engineering and computer science faculties, security is not given much importance. If security is such a big problem, why is not a big priority? So that was my question.
So the answer is basically economics. The market doesn't reward security, so companies don't prioritize it. That's the short answer. Right? I mean, the longer answer are just variations of that. Right? When you're designing software, it's features, it's time to market, it's price. And security adversely affects all of those things. Consumers don't know enough to be able to judge on the basis of security, either whether they're individual consumers or corporate consumers. And largely the risks are an externality. Right? So let's take SolarWinds. SolarWinds is a private equity funded company. It's actually owned by a Brazilian billionaire. And that private equity company, like all private equity companies, does this kind of same basic move. They buy existing companies with pretty sticky customer bases, then basically wring as much cost as they can out of the product or service. They make it as lousy as possible without losing companies, which means SolarWinds for the past 2 years has underspent on security because it wasn't something consumers saw, and it was a way they can cut costs. And that's basically the economic incentive. Without actual regulation forcing companies to make security a priority, they make it not a priority. And we know that, and this is why cell phone security is so lousy, why it is so easy for you to hijack someone else's phone account, because the phone companies don't prioritize it, why banking websites don't have two-factor authentication. And all of these things are down to what suppliers are doing is they're providing as bad security as they can get away with, because customers don't understand the details enough to make real good decisions. And we can go on for an hour on that, but that's the basic answer to your question. But fix the economic incentives, and then suddenly the tech gets all better.
Very interesting, because you put economics as the problem, not the solution, which is not something that we're used to hearing. The second question.
Solution, right? I mean, the way I'll fix it is I need to raise the cost of insecurity. Mm-hmm. So if like for SolarWinds, if the company will get fined or the CEO will go to jail because they had lousy security, then they're going to spend more on security. Right? So it's an incentive problem. The economic incentives are misaligned. That's what we need to fix.
So we need the equivalent of a carbon tax on insecurity.
There are many types of answers. That is certainly one of them. Yes.
Second question, please.
Mr. Schneier, a few years ago, in 2013, the top advisor on cybersecurity to the Australian government was not familiar with the Tor project. And my question is, do policymakers know enough about cybersecurity to put in place meaningful laws and regulations? Is the situation improving?
So the answer is they don't know enough, but they don't have to. And so look, we live in a very complex society in many dimensions. And our lawmakers basically don't have the expertise. And whether it's, pharmaceutical policy or agricultural policy or military policy, right? They are not going to be experts in those things. What they need to have is expertise on staff. Now, yes, there is not enough, not even cybersecurity, but just internet technological expertise on legislative staffs pretty much around the world. It is improving, but it is slow. And without that expertise, what we find is lawmakers rely on lobbyists because that's who's there to give them advice. So I don't think we need to train our lawmakers in cybersecurity any more than I need to train them in airline safety. We just need to know how to get the expertise when they need it to make policy.
I think that's a very crisp answer. Third question, please.
Mr. Schneier, we are generations of digital natives born with smartphone in our hands, but we are handicapped when it comes to privacy and security. How do we fix this?
What am I actually fixing? So what is the problem? So yes, right. I mean, digital natives, I think, have a very different view of tech than like my parents do. I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I don't think digital natives are handicapped when it comes to privacy and security. I think they have very strong intuitions about both. I think it's often the older generation doesn't understand their threat models. When you talk to a teenager, they're worried about their teachers, their parents, their peers. They're not worried about the government. They're not worried about corporations. And they have very finely tuned ways of dealing with privacy against the threats that matter to them. I mean, I've long thought that the internet is the greatest generation gap since rock and roll. And in general, in generation gaps, the younger generation wins because the older generation dies. So I think we want to listen to the digital natives rather than try to fix them. So I'm not sure how you think they're handicapped. I'm curious if you want to follow up and explain that a little bit.
Well, maybe the one question that we ask from all panelists is that students from all fields tell us, despite the fact that the United Nations, governments, countries tell them that cybersecurity is extremely important, they hear from some of their teachers, from their peers, and from the people who surround them that cybersecurity is a topic for experts and not something for everyone to be concerned about. Certainly not everyone is concerned. And is this a niche topic, or is this a topic that we should all be interested in?
100% a niche topic. And so look, again, the world's complex. Friday, I got on air, I was on an airplane. Right? Big deal, right? Post-pandemic on an airplane. Airplane safety, extremely important. My life depended on it. Totally a niche topic. I was able to get on that airplane without having to even think for a moment about engine maintenance, about avionics, about the security of the electronic systems, about crew training and crew rest, right? Very important, but niche. What we want in our society is to be able to do the thing without being an expert. I want to be able to walk into a drugstore and not know a thing about pharmacology and know that nothing in there will kill me if I follow the directions on the label. And I want cybersecurity to be the same way. I do not want you all to become experts in this. That's ridiculous. You have your own expertise. You're doing your own thing. Right? Cybersecurity has to work like airplane safety. It just has to work. So there are experts in, flight training, and they spend their life worrying about it, so I don't have to. And in the same way, there'll be people, right, like Keith Alexander's company, who will spend their lives worrying about cybersecurity, so you don't have to. So when it is not a niche topic, we are failing you. And when the original automobiles, way back in the 1910s, were sold with a repair manual and a toolkit, because you had to be an expert to drive an automobile. Now you don't. And society is much better off. And this is true for most tech. It actually doesn't become socially interesting until it becomes technologically boring. But the internet took off when you did not have to be an expert in computer science, right, to have an email address, to have a website. And security is going to be the same way. So no, I want this to be an extraordinarily niche topic, just like everything else. So we can get on with what we really want to do.
Well, I think this is a very interesting idea. And of course, yes, what we want is not to be experts in cybersecurity. What we want is for everyone to be secure, which is not exactly the same thing. But we want security for sure. And we want security embedded in everything. And I think there's a way to go to get there.
Right. And of course, you have to know something. Again, think of automobiles, right? Wear a seatbelt. Right? Don't drive over the speed limit. Right?
Exactly.
Know how to get out of a skid. I mean, there's some things you're going to have to know, but you don't have to know the details of the engine. And that's important. Airplanes is even better. I have to know basically nothing. I just do what they tell me to do.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for putting real life examples that everyone, and I mean really everyone, can relate to, and across all sectors, and for students, but also for experts. I think this was a very, very dynamic and interesting talk. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope to very soon.
Yeah, sometime I'll do something in person again.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to that.
Hey, bye-bye.
Bruce, have a great holiday. Here we are. Governor Alexson, welcome. Welcome. We're so happy that you're with us.
Great. Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here.
Well, we're so excited that actually we're putting it all together with students around the world with the topic that relates to really education, national security, and security at all levels. And what I really like in terms of your approach is how you bridge between the military and defense with the civilian, which is one of the points that you're raising in your talk. So without any further delays, I'll let you start, and then we will wrap up with questions.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. And, three great speakers. And I've almost had to change my remarks as they've gone around because they hit so many key points and a great thing. So I'd just like to say, Ambassador Lauber, thank you for your insightful comments to begin with. John Alexander, thank you for your continued support to the as an advisor to the Army Cyber Institute. Bruce, Mr. Snyder, thank you. I've enjoyed reading your books. We met once a few years ago when you came to West Point, and I've always enjoyed. You have an open invitation to come back. I'd love to talk to you again. And distinguished guests and panelists. So, as stated, I'm Colonel Jeff Erickson. I'm the director of the Army Cyber Institute located at the United States Military Academy here at West Point. As a disclaimer, I do want to say, though, I am speaking on I'm going to provide you my personal opinion based on my experiences today. And what I'm saying here does not reflect the official position of the Department of Defense, the United States Army, or the United States Military Academy. But I think I can provide you some insights on cyber education based on what we're doing here. What I want to talk about today is the necessity of cyber education as it relates to three areas: the nation's economy, the nation's defense, and greater society. And I'm very pleased to see how much of your report focuses on the necessity for interdisciplinary education. That's a term you're going to hear me use multiple times as I talk today, as it goes through this. Real quick, Army Cyber Institute, just so you know, we were created in 2012. We are not a very old organization, as most Army organizations go. We serve as the Army's think tank, and we work with other cyber organizations such as Army Cyber Command, Cyber Center of Excellence, and even non-cyber units that are out there. And our task is to look about 5 to 10 years out. And we're trying to identify gaps that are out there as they relate to the threat, technology, and people and training. We're located at the United States Military Academy, which is great. It allows us to take advantage of the great facilities they have here in the academic faculty. It's important to note that within my organization, not everyone's a computer scientist. We have a mix of civilian, military. We have folks from various branches of our military. I have folks who are signal, military intelligence, information operations, simulations officers. I have folks with diverse academic backgrounds: computer science, electrical engineering, math, social science, law, history. And that's what allows us to get to working as interdisciplinary teams on different projects. And we focus on three efforts: advancing the Army's body of knowledge as it relates to cyberspace, leveraging impactful partnerships, and then finally, cyber leader education. It's really that third part I want to talk about today. So from an economic perspective, there's really kind of three things we look at: innovation, design, technologies, production, and protection of infrastructure. As far as innovation goes, and I'm going to talk about how I see the current environment first, and then I'm going to talk about how we are addressing this through cyber education here at West Point and across the Army. The current path of innovation is heavily focused on taking existing technologies and integrating them together. And Bruce hit this on his previous points. We see this in our daily lives. We used to have a single device that handled navigation, a GPS. We used to have a single device that handled photos, a camera. We used to have a single device that handled how you talked over long distance, the phone. And we've merged all those together to create a single device that is much greater than the sum of the parts. But while we did that, we never really integrated, we never guaranteed that all the integrations of those parts were all secure. And so we have to take that into consideration. Additionally, innovation requires imagination informed by current and potential future technologies. And so having a deeper understanding of how those technologies work are important. On the role of imagination when it comes to education, folks like to point to the Star Trek communicator as the inspiration for the smartphone. That's debatable, but there are no shortage of NASA astronauts out there and engineers who mention Star Trek as an inspiration for where they're going for going into that field. A 5-year-old doesn't wake up and say, "I want to understand mathematics behind interstellar trajectories." A child wakes up and says, "I want to be the first person to walk on the Mars." And so that inspiration that science fiction serves for education is key. I think having a healthy appetite for science fiction there's lots of books out there: The Science of Star Wars, The Science of Star Trek. I'd encourage you all to get into that. And if when you talk to younger kids, encourage them to look at science fiction, because it can inspire them to really become the leaders in this field. But going back to my point on integration, our engineering disciplines need to take security into consideration as part of the design process. We have to bake it in early. It can't be a device that we snap on later that provides us the security for our devices. When it comes to production, many of the efficiencies that we have gained in our economy are being offset by increased risk. And Mr. Snyder talked about this. Risk right now, I can assume risk when it comes to security because it benefits my bottom line. And if something does go wrong, that cost is almost shared by many other folks. It's kind of a tragedy of a commons type of scenario here. We need incentivizing individual risks to focus on security, because and that means having a cost associated with it that is appropriate for the types of risks they're assuming. You know, this issue isn't a single individual organizational problem. We're all using the same ecosystems, and even when it comes to our competitors in the economy, you have to be aware of that ecosystem and the risks they're taking impact on your organization too. So we have to have a cultural change within our economy, all our economies, where the potential liabilities of a cyber attack or data breach becomes greater. Infrastructure. Within our economies, we've all grown so accustomed to having a robust infrastructure that has a high level of dependency that it's created some blind spots. You know, the recent Colonial Pipeline ransomware attacks highlights the impact a single event can have on a nation and individual citizens. If you were here in the United States a month ago, getting gas down in Virginia and areas of New Jersey was a challenge. There was panic buying going on because of people thought the gas wasn't going to be available. So an event that happened down in Georgia was having a ripple effect all the way up the East Coast here in the United States. You know, the issue with our infrastructure is previously it was pretty simple and it was very robust. And it had a certain amount of flexibility. And that flexibility allowed us to use brute force and scale to offset any inefficiencies in the system. Additionally, we were able to build in some fail-safes. For example, if one region of the United States went down for electrical power, we had the ability to move power between different locations. And as I said before, this kind of created some blind spots when it came to our infrastructure. Cyber warfare or cyberspace is creating a increased emphasis on our critical infrastructure. You know, the digital connectivity that makes our infrastructure efficient also makes it very vulnerable. It creates interdependencies that have a cascading effect across other places. And finally, we all have a vested interest in understanding what those vulnerabilities are. To further complicate this problem with infrastructure, though, there's a lot of non-technical aspects. There's differing authorities. In the United States, we have different authorities between the federal, state, and local levels. We have different standards based on the sectors that are involved, the suppliers who made the equipment, the organizations involved. And there's also different policies, procedures, and practices that are implemented. You know, we've created a challenge where we have to rely on multi-layered public-private partnerships. And this is what General Alexander was really getting at. You know, there's no single person out there that understands the relationships of our critical infrastructure, even in a small city. If you think of an alphabet, somebody understands A through J, and somebody understands K through M, and somebody may understand Q through Z, but there's no single person who knows A through Z from through that entire process. So it requires groups of experts familiar with each other's organizations, coordinating and sharing information on a regular basis. And this is why the importance of exercises is so important. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later when we get to the education piece. So how do we continue to move forward with innovation, production, and protection of critical infrastructure? Interdisciplinary cyber education. Now, from a military perspective, we're concerned with protecting our force and maneuvering through cyberspace. So some examples. There's a force protection issue here. When COVID-19 first appeared a year ago, there were accusations that an Army reservist was patient zero. Sergeant First Class Banassis is her name. She was in Wuhan, China for the 2019 Military World Games. She was competing in cycling. She became the center of attention because there was a U2 conspiracy theory out there that said she was patient zero and she was the one who actually spread it to Wuhan, China. Her family was doxxed. They were attacked online. That was an example of a disinformation campaign or misinformation campaign that was leveraging against her and her family, which placed them at risk. That is a force protection issue for our military. Soldiers' online personas are impacting their combat readiness, and more leaders are being concerned, or more and more leaders' time is being consumed dealing with social media. It's becoming an attack vector that's being used against soldiers, and it's impacting combat power. In the kinetic realm, or out in the real world, back in 2018, a 20-year-old Australian university student looked at the Strava global heat map. For those you don't know, Strava is a running app you can use with your smartwatches and smartphones, and it keeps track of your distances you're running and uploads it to servers. Well, all that information was put out there for the public, and you could go in there and you could see the actual outline of our perimeters of our overseas bases, whether they were in Afghanistan, Iraq, other countries. Clearly, that's an operational risk. Now, I don't believe the soldiers did it intentionally. They didn't realize what they were exposing. The data they were providing was exposing out there, but it creates a situation that could be used against, in this case, the United States forces to conduct kinetic attacks and potentially attack or gather additional intel on them. You know, Bruce also used the example of the. I was going to use the example of the F-35. We often say the F-35 airplane, the Joint Strike Fighter, is a computer that flies. You know, in Bruce's book, he mentions, you know, the modern refrigerator is a computer that keeps things cold. Autonomous cars are computers that move people. Our weapon systems are really the same. It's not so much that it's a tank with a computer in it. It's a computer that employs fire, maneuver, and shock effect to create those effects that a tank does. If we want to protect our equipment, there needs to be an understanding of the underlying systems to include the supporting supply chain. And we need an educated force, both in and out of uniform, that can protect those networks and systems. Additionally, as we move through cyberspace, and I'm going to talk in terms of, I'm not going to talk offensive operations, I'm going to talk in terms of defensive operations here. We struggle with educating units and leaders in understanding the electromagnetic spectrum. There's a lot, there's a lot of math and science involved in understanding that. But just as camouflage is important for a soldier walking through the woods, you know, you want to make sure you match whatever the foliage is so that you can't be visually identified. What is camouflage for the electromagnetic spectrum look like? Everybody needs to understand what systems they have that are radiating, what systems they have that can be sensed and potentially used as targets. We have a saying in the Army: every soldier is a sensor. And in the past, that meant every soldier needed to keep their eyes open and report what they saw. But now it's a more literal meaning. Every soldier is being equipped with more and more and instrumented with more and more devices that gather data on the soldier and what's going on around that soldier in their environments. I keep going back to Mr. Schneier, but yeah, he mentioned some great points in his example of the automobile. I would take a different tact on it. As far as the first automobiles, you know, when you look back to the United States before World War II, just as World War II is getting ready to kick off, automobiles and farm mechanization was becoming widely adopted. In 1940, 58% of all farms had automobiles. And while mechanization didn't become the primary form of farming until after World War II, a good number of the soldiers that were exposed to those technologies on the farms and in the cities, they would join the Army, and that became the basis of the Army's motorized and mechanized units. And many of them knew how to troubleshoot, you know, internal combustion engines or replace track because they were exposed to those technologies prior to the war. And then they were able to take that experiences in the war and transport that back to the farms and make mechanize the farms even faster. Even up to the 1980s, most American kids had a basic understanding of the combustion engine, as millions of kids mowed lawns during the summer. I knew how to troubleshoot an engine at that point. Now, if you were to ask me to troubleshoot a modern car, I would not have any idea where to start. So what is the cyberspace equivalent of this? You know, we have smartphones, but even with a degree in computer science, I'm thinking twice before I crack this thing open because they're so complex. We are a generation of technology users, but we lack an understanding of the deeper meaning of, or what's really going on with the data, applications, and operating systems of these devices. So, how do we create soldiers who can protect themselves and maneuver through cyberspace? Again, we'll come back to interdisciplinary cyber education. And then finally, for society, you know, there's issues with countering disinformation, misinformation, protecting individuals, families, and communities, defining acceptable legal behavior. You know, you turn on the news any night, and you'll see accusations of misinformation, information that's factually wrong or taken out of context. And disinformation, false information that's intentionally spread with the intent to harm or deceive. You see that in any political discussion. In some ways, it's become shorthand for discrediting any opponents out there. And unfortunately, many folks are having a difficult time discerning between the two. Making matters more complex, our current laws and authorities are not really set up to deal with this type of information. And as a citizen, I'm significantly concerned about the growing challenges in this area. I think we're creating a generation of skeptics. And at what point do we move beyond being healthy skeptics, which is a good thing, to just becoming unhealthy cynics, where we just outright question everything and believe nothing that's presented to us? You know, how does a Western democracy operate when every institution is constantly painted in a negative light? Additionally, I think we need to start looking at what is the acceptable behavior when it comes to online. What is acceptable when it comes to online behavior? You know, clearly there are extreme examples when it comes to terrorist websites, criminal activity, child pornography, you know, that are off limits. But what about domestic extremism? What about activist sites? What about, you know, the down the rabbit hole nature of the internet makes clearly defining rules, what's acceptable, very difficult. And additionally, the fact that I mentioned doxing before for that sergeant, the fact that's become acceptable behavior when it comes to, you know, through individual, when the fact that's acceptable behavior is placing individual safety at risk. So how do we counter disinformation, misinformation, protect individuals, and define acceptable legal behavior? Interdisciplinary cyber education. And I keep coming back to that point because I think we all recognize it needs to be done. So how do we get to this here at West Point? I'm going to start here at West Point. I'm going to talk about how we educate the cadets here, and then I'm going to work out towards the Army and just some thoughts on education overall. So we are in our second year of a cyber science major here at West Point. In addition to many other technical majors here, you know, we have degrees in computer science, applied statistics, data science, electrical engineering, information technology, and systems engineering. Every cadet here graduates with a bachelor's of science degree. Every cadet here takes 2 mandatory cyber courses. The first one is CY 105, Computing Fundamentals. They take it their first year here. And if they are a non-STEM, a non-science, technology, engineering, or math major, they all take a second course their junior year called CY 305, Cyber Foundations. Additionally, my organization, the Army Cyber Institute, we provide instructors who teach in 8 of the 13 academic departments here at West Point. And we infuse cyber-related material into those other departments. So even a law major is exposed to the aspects of law related to cyberspace. Philosophy majors are exposed to emerging technical or ethical issues related to cyberspace and so on. Additionally, cadets who have a deeper interest in the subject, they can participate in competitive teams. We have a cadet competitive cyber team, a cyber policy team. Cadets have the chance to work on capstone projects related to cyber, or they can even work in the Cyber Research Center, which is run by the Electrical Engineering Computer Science Department. So a week ago, we had graduation here, and we graduated roughly 1,000 cadets, and they're now second lieutenants out in the Army. Of those 1,000 that graduated, 41 of them were going into the Army's cyber branch. So they have very technical backgrounds. But the other 960 plus cadets, every one of them, again, has taken at least multiple classes in cyberspace, and they are at least, while they may not be experts in cyberspace, the term we like to use, they are cyber aware. They have an understanding of how it's going to impact them on the modern battlefield and in modern society. Internal to West Point, we work with the Army's Reserve Officer Training, external to West Point, we work with the Army's Reserve Officer Training Corps program. We run the Army Cyber Leader Development Program, which awards cadets what's called a skill identifier. If they demonstrate skills in the cyberspace domain, they have to major in a technical degree, they have to belong to a competitive team, they have to do an internship, they have to attend a conference. And this allows, from a talent management perspective, the Army to know who has these skills out there. We also work with the Department of Defense Cyber Institute Initiative, which is expanding the Cyber Leader Development Program to other academic colleges out there in the senior military colleges. We conduct an internship program here where we bring cadets here from outside of West Point for over the summer. and they spend a good 4 weeks doing dedicated research in cyber-related topics. And then we also make recommendations back to their schools of what career field they should go into. And so while we can't educate every ROTC cadet across the Army, we consider this a way to kind of sprinkle the cyber goodness across the force. And then we also support the Army's education when it comes to professional military education, joint professional military education programs that are non-cyber related schools. And this is how we address the kind of cyber for others piece. And finally, we are active in the accreditation board for engineering, ABET, cybersecurity standards. We provide input to that and make sure that our programs here are aligned with that. So, you know, what it all comes down to is having a multidisciplinary focus. And I keep coming back to that word because I love it. It really gets to interdisciplinary focus. I love it because it really gets to the challenge in this area, right? It isn't just a technical issue. It isn't just a policy issue, a social issue, or even a national security issue. It's all of them combined. And that's why I'm encouraged to see this report from the Bridge Foundation that emphasizes that so much. So I guess with that, I will turn it over for some questions and look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Oh, I'm back here. So thank you so much for raising the importance of critical thinking that's at the center of everything that we do and the interdisciplinary nature of our project. Let's go straight to the first question. If you're ready. Yes, please.
Colonel Erickson, this project is for students from all fields. Is learning cybersecurity basics also equipment for all students at West Point, or only those in computer science and security?
Yeah, all right, great, thanks. So good question, and I kind of touched on that in my remarks, so let me just kind of reiterate that again. You know, every cadet, it has to take multiple cyber courses, and so they take 2 of them, one their freshman year and one their junior year. They also get exposure to the cybersecurity domain through their other majors. I even have one person who teaches in the philosophy department. I have one person who teaches in the history department, and they make sure cyber is injected into the lesson plans there. Additionally, you know, every cadet here also has to maintain, has to do the standard cyber training that's required of all soldiers in the Department of Defense. And so they have to do online training as it relates to cybersecurity. Everybody has to go through and do their regular training in order to have access to our networks here. And so they all get exposure to it that way. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. For the second question.
Colonel Erickson, cybersecurity is meant to be multidisciplinary, but there is little or no cooperation between sectors and disciplines. Even within a university, there is no dialogue between the faculties of medicine, business, or law with that of computer science. How the military and civilian sectors can cooperate if for the civilian sector cooperation is so difficult?
Yeah, so you are hitting on one of the great challenges out there. That's a great question. So let me start by saying this. Partnerships are difficult. It takes a lot of time and energy to start a partnership. It takes a lot of time and energy to maintain one and cultivate it and grow it. And they can quickly evaporate too, as soon as somebody retires or moves away. So here are some thoughts, and I'll talk about academia, and then I'll talk about the civilian sector, or other sectors out there. So similar to my comments on cross-department integration, I'd encourage academic schools and departments to consider cross-fertilization. It could be as simple as have a single lesson in a non-technical major that deals with cyberspace. And I've used the examples of ethics, and I've used the examples of mechanical engineering is a good one, right? We have a department here that does mechanical engineering and design and robotics. Well, understanding how cybersecurity is going to protect that is key, and having that integrated as I said, baked in from the beginning is important. I would encourage organizations to look at multidisciplinary clubs and activities. One of the most successful teams we have here at West Point is the cyber policy team. This team includes cadets from multiple disciplines such as law, philosophy, and computer science. They come together, they go to competitions, and as part of the competition, they're presented with what's called the Cyber 912 challenge. All right, a cyber attack has happened in the United States or another country. What actions or recommendations are you going to make to the national leadership on what to do? And having a team of folks, not just from the computer science department, but from across those different areas, put together and come up with a solution. Our team's been very successful by taking that multidisciplinary approach. Academic journals. Academic journals should consider publishing articles that are outside their normal field. We just did I don't know if John Alexander's still on the line, we just did a cyber defense review, which is the journal we publish. The theme was COVID-19. And we started that a year ago. And when we started it, I was thinking this isn't going to be relevant a year later, but it clearly is still relevant. And it touched just not on cybersecurity aspects of COVID-19. It touched on people working from home. It touched on the health industry. It touched on many other things out there. So looking at, expanding the footprint of these issues into different areas go. Partnership with others outside your disciplinary research or writing. So if you're looking to write an article, bring in somebody who has a different perspective and a different background to make your research and writing stronger. Now, within the civilian sector, we have worked many times, we've done a series of events called Jack Voltaic, which is a critical infrastructure exercise or event. And we did a series of these. We did one back in 2016 with New York City. We did one in 2018 with Houston, Texas. We did one this last fall with Savannah, Georgia, and Charleston, South Carolina. And what we did in each of these events is we brought together the local city, the state that was involved, Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We brought in the energy sector. We brought in, local emergency management. We brought in all these folks together, gave them a sample scenario of a cyber attack against their city, and then we made them go through and react to as they would normally. And it's amazing, creating those relationships early can really help out those cities in building the resiliency to an attack. Because we like to say, if you're exchanging your business card while the crisis is happening, it's too late. All right. So getting those relationships built early, exercising those relationships and cultivating them is key to moving forward. So I hope that answers your question.
Wonderful. Thank you. Third question, please.
Yes, thank you. So, Colonel Erickson, we had the Cold War, and we are again in the world with two superpowers, the USA and China fighting for supremacy. And is this a healthy competition or a new form of economic and military warfare? And is cyberspace and even outer space the new theater of war? And how does the rest of the world, Africa, Europe, and the rest of Asia fit in this picture?
Yeah, so that is a fantastic question. So what you're asking me to define what everything looks like as far as future warfare in the next coming up. So again, I'm going to provide you my opinion. This is not the official policy of the United States or Department of Defense or anything like that. But let me give you some thoughts. When you look, we like to talk in terms of the DIME model: diplomatic, information, military, and economic. Right? Those are kind of the levers that governments have that they can leverage against competitors or against even with allies too. But there's always going to be tension, right? There's always tension and competition there. And so, if you go look at Sun Tzu, the great philosopher from China, he says, water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. Just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there's no constant conditions. Basically what he's saying is, you're going to avoid the things your enemy is good at, you're going to avoid, you're going to flow away from those. And the things they're weak at, you're going to flow towards, right? And right now, I would argue, the United States still enjoys a lot of military power and the ability to project, right? We have the ability to move aircraft carriers around the world. We have the ability to employ forces around the world. And so no enemy right now wants to fight like that. And I hope we don't have to fight like that. Believe me, I do not enjoy combat. What I would like to see, though, what they're trying to do, though, is they're flowing to our weakness, right? And if our weakness is in the information area or the economic area or the diplomatic area, that's where competitors such as China are going to flow, right? So I don't like calling it warfare because we tend to consider warfare, at least in the United States, as a binary situation. We're either in war or we're in peace. But the reality of it is there's a whole spectrum between those two. That's the competition space, right? And that's where we're spending all our time right now, is in that competition space. And again, it goes into the information area primarily, and economic area right now is where competitors are trying to seek an advantage over in this case, the United States or any of our allies. Do I consider cyberspace or space a new theater of war? I'll break it down into two parts. So even though cyberspace, it is relatively new, but it's been a domain that's been exploited since the first days of the internet. It's what is done is it's allowed us to scale things up. The scope, scale, and speed has changed, right? Intelligence gathering. We can do things now in milliseconds that would take months of developing a target in the past. We can monitor thousands of sensors now when we used to have to. It would be difficult to do that using past technologies. So the scope, scale, and speed is what's changed. But cyberspace, I wouldn't necessarily consider it new. It's all it's done is changed the way intelligence has been gathered, signals are being done, command and control is being done in the past. Now, space is different. The number of satellite constellations continues to grow, and coupled with ground-based satellite ranging stations that are being developed now, that's concerning. The ability of a nation to disrupt, destroy, or interfere with another nation's satellites could be a game changer when it comes to warfare and telecommunications. And as we rely more and more on the telecommunications network and other capabilities provided us by space, that's an issue. The global economy right now depends on shipping and ground transportation, and that system relies on position, navigation, timing to be efficient. The ships use PNT that comes off of satellites in order to be as efficient as possible. And when you have something like we saw with the Suez Canal where it was blocked and they have to take a multi-week detour around the Horn of Africa, having a disruption to that PNT system can either lead to accidents, it's going to lead to inefficiencies in shipping lanes, it can lead to delays, all sorts of problems. And airplanes use it, ships use it, trucks on the roads use it. Everything relies on that system. So a disruption to the PNT network or capability out there would have significant impacts on all our economies worldwide. And as far as how does how does Africa, Europe, and Asia fit into it? Well, alliances and partnerships are key. The United States, our stated strategy is we continue to rely by, with, and through our allies. And, we will continue to partner with like-minded allies and nations. We hope we rather have more friends on our side than more enemies. And so we want to, make sure that we'll continue to leverage good relationships that we have with Africa, with European nations, with Asia. And, this is the world, we want to see a world that's peaceful. We want to see a world where everybody's economically prosperous. And we want to see a world that our future generations can continue to enjoy peace and technology and all that brings. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for, and I'll bridge two topics that you've raised at two different times. One is the importance of alliances and partnerships that are absolutely key. And earlier you said that cultivating cooperation and partnerships requires effort and investment. I think the two go together very, very nicely. Of course, you raised many other points and areas, and I really liked that you focused a large part of your talk on economics, which I'm not sure if everyone expected that from someone at West Point or sitting at West Point, and the fact that you were working for peace, not working for war, you're working for peace, and then you have to work with allies and like-minded, and so I think that this was very, very important. Yeah. We would like to conclude with one question that we asked for everyone, which you know which one it is. Is cybersecurity something everyone should be concerned about and interested in, or is this just for a small group of experts?
Yeah, I think to recap, I think General Alexander said everybody needs to be concerned with it. I think Mr. Schneier said it's a niche, and I'm gonna kind of try to walk the line between the two of them, I suppose. I think it's important to change the culture surrounding cybersecurity. Many people might look at the technology as something that only experts need to worry about, but the reality of it is, in the modern world, you cannot perform almost any job without technology. I guess you could point to somebody who digs a ditch out there with a shovel, but you know what? He's probably digging that ditch based on a GPS coordinate provided to him by, again, a satellite out there or something like that, right? So I think it's important to look at it from the point that it's not that the technology makes your job easier. It's a critical component of your job. It truly is. We talk in Department of Defense. We talk in terms of joint functions, right? There's joint intelligence, and there's joint fires, and there's joint logistics or sustainment, and there's joint maneuver. Well, you can't do any of those functions without command and control systems, without digital electronic logistics systems. You can't do any of those things. And so I always get worried when people try to say, all right, within my organization, here's my cyber person, and here's my logistics person, and here's my fires person, and here's my intelligence person, and that's not how it works. That cyber or command and control piece undergirds every other function that an organization is doing. And so having an understanding of how your data is handled and protected, how your systems are vulnerable, the potential threats and attackers, that's key to increasing the overall resiliency of the entire environment and the ecosystem. If you handle an electronic device at work, you have a responsibility to understand at least the basics of how cybersecurity works. The basics, again, I'm not saying you have to be an expert, you have to be cyber aware, and you have to at least apply good cyber hygiene. When it comes to your actions out there. Otherwise, we're just going to continue on down this road of more and more attacks, more and more disruptions that come about. So again, it's changing the cultural mindset. It's not something that helps your job become better. It's a critical component of your job.
I think it sums it up pretty well. Everyone should be cyber aware, and good cyber hygiene is for everyone.
Yep. They put that on a bumper sticker. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, it has been I think a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation that you gave us.
Good. Adam, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this group.
Thank you so much. From Geneva to the rest of the world, to West Point. On this, I hand it over to Margot.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we came to the end, but in fact, it is just the beginning. Let me wrap up in the motto associated to this project. Cybersecurity is like a marathon, not a sprint. It calls for a sustained effort, cross-cutting approach, and questions that lead to novel thinking and action. Thank you to our guest speakers, partners, and everyone around the world, co-creators of this event. Dear friends, thank you for being with us, and join us at the Global Cyber Lab. See you soon.